Hi everyone, my name is Keanu Eugene, and over the past 4 years, I've written almost 2 million words since I started writing, and I've gotten over 50 million views and 50,000 people reading my book across all my websites. You can see all my progress from start to finish on my web novel, which is free in the link below. And today I'm going to be talking about point of view and tense, because in this playlist, Writing 101, we're going through every single thing you need from the beginning of the book before you start writing it to the end of it. And before we even begin writing, you have to understand what you're going to write, what camera view you're going to write from, so to speak, right? How close the camera is to the character and what kind of story you want to tell, because the answers to those two questions, what kind of camera work you like and how close to the character you want your story to be, determines your point of view and your tense. So, as I said, almost 2 million views here on Trackerbear. You can find all my stuff for free on Web Novel, so you can see how bad I was 4 years ago and how much I've improved now, right? From Elementalist all the way up to Binary. All my links will be down below, so you can check them out. And now let's get into it. This will also be down below this document, so you can go download it, get a PDF if you want, take a look, and always have this cheat sheet for you, basically at all times, so you can help yourself stay consistent. But now let's start with tense. So in my last video, I gave an example of right. In my last video, I gave an example of prose, right? How to actually do creative writing style writing, and I gave a short syntax example towards the end of it, because in that video I wrote a small intro, a small chapter one for a story that I'm not planning on writing, so I could do it anyway. But before we get to that, we have to do the basic stuff. We have to eat the vegetables first, right? POV tense and syntax are the vegetables, so to speak. So we're going to get through it first in this video, and the next one will be syntax, and then we can go into all the actual writing techniques. So that video was just to show you that when it all comes together, that's how it'll look, but now we're going to get into the foundation of it all. So tenses are effectively past, present, future, right? This is the stuff you learned in school and it's natural to you. However you speak is what tense you're in. Some people think in past tense. I personally think in present omniscient, but omniscient is a point of view. We'll get to that later. So I don't think of something as has happened. I think of something as happening, as my default in my brain, because I don't really view myself as the main character in my own life. I do to an extent, but like I see myself as a small part of a big universe. So your personal view on yourself impacts this slightly, but also the media you take in. So the first one we're doing is past tense, which is by far the most common. So this is what most people have been trained to think in. This is the industry standard, and if you write anything that isn't past tense, you will be considered the outlier. I myself write in present tense, which is the most difficult and pretty much the most rare tense out of the main two, which is past and present. So some people, when they see past tense, they think, oh, they see present tense, they think, okay, this book is not for me. But generally speaking, no matter what tense you choose, aside from second tense, which we'll get into later, if you choose between past and present, if you stay consistent, people's brains will autopilot through the tense and just read the story. So if you write in present tense, like me, if you keep it consistent for the first 2,000 words, people's brain will see the tense as like a subconscious thought, and they'll just focus on your story. So don't let the industry standard, as I say industry standard, make you think that you have to fit into one of these boxes. Just do the one that feels natural to you. I'll be doing a breakdown, so some points on the tense, an example of how to write it for each one, and then at the end of it I'll combine point of view. So I'll give examples of each tense and point of view combined. So you'll get to see exactly which style feels more natural to you and which style you enjoy reading the most. At certain points I'll also break down how these tenses and point of views affect your genre, because certain stories are much more difficult to tell. Not impossible, but difficult to tell depending on the choices and combinations you make. Telling a mystery that is future present tense, well, future omniscient, is very difficult because mysteries rely on information not being known, and future means the narrator knows everything that's going to happen, right? And omniscient means they also know everything that's going to happen, so you have to tell the audience everything, which is why certain genres have certain tense and point of view expectations. But if you're good enough, you can break them, and I believe in you. Do it. Be the one. But yeah, tenses. Let's begin with past tense, right? The breakdown starts here, so you can check the headings on the left when you check on this document, read this document, or download it. But number one in the breakdown section, the industry standard in most stories and formats. This is the easiest one to use. It is what most people default to in their minds, so it feels the most natural to read a story like this. People also generally accept that stories have already happened by the time you're reading them. So everything in a story happened in the past. But that is actually our point too, because that's a double-edged sword. That makes it easier for people to start a story, but more difficult for them to finish a story, because depending on what type of story you're telling, past tense gives a sense of finality. Okay? Game of Thrones is past tense, but it is not omniscient, which saves it, right? But if you're telling a story that has one main character and it's past tense, the audience is going to assume the main character survives. That's just an assumption they're going to make because they're going to get attached. And if you then break that, you're going to piss off a lot of people, even if you haven't done anything wrong, technically. It's just how they feel. And getting them to feel something is the point of storytelling and prose writing. But you want them to feel something good about your book. Even if it's a miserable experience, if it's intentionally meant to be a miserable experience, they'll understand that and they'll be okay with it. So it gives a sense of finality, meaning the story is already over. So if you focus on one main character instead of the tale, which is the larger story, the audience will build expectations that the main character survives. This can be avoided by stating the main character doesn't survive, so you can simply say it, right? But this adds tragedy as a subgenre, which some people avoid like the plague. Some people want a happy ending in their story, right? So you also have to be careful of that. And if you don't say that at some point or add the tragedy subgenre, people will feel betrayed because the implication is that the main character survives. So it's a very difficult line to tread. But at some point, you just have to decide if you're more interested in marketing your story by having it be tragedy, or telling the story you want to tell by just having the main character die anyway in a past tense story, right? But there are many stories that make this work, but it's all about how much weight is on one character. So what I got into there was mainly past tense first person stories, but we'll get into more of those examples later down. And point 4 examples of specific words are ran, leapt, dropped, flew, and screamed. Right? So I'll be using the same words but changing their tense for each example as we go through it. And then the example of a sentence with this, the sentence will also stay the same but change with the tense, is he ran down the hill. And you'll see here ran is underlined because that's the word that indicates what tense we are in. Ran is past tense. It already happened. By the time the narrator is saying this, he's at the bottom of the hill, right? That's the effect you're going for. That's the finality that comes into play with this tense. Now, present tense is less common. For good reason. It is much more difficult to tell a story in present tense, and the advantages you get are also much more difficult to capitalize on. But if you, in my opinion, right, and this is partly because I write present tense for this reason, in my opinion, if you master present tense, you tell the best stories. Just overall. Lord of the Rings, present omniscient. Dune, present omniscient. Right? This I think Dune is. Yeah. Like epics, grand epics are normally present omniscient tense. Grand epics in certain examples where it's a POV story, present POV story from like a god's POV, flexes between the tenses. But generally, as I said, once you keep your tense consistent, if you're doing present for the first 2,000 words, you're kind of expected to go into past tense for certain lines. Because some things just flow better in past tense. So the audiences, since they're so programmed to past tense, if you add past tense into a present tense book for a line or two, they won't mind. But you generally should not add present tense into a past tense book, even for one line, because they will notice. The human brain is relaxed when it's read present, but it reads past tense, but it gets alert if it suddenly sees present tense. Okay, so this is a double standard. Present tense gets the ability to flex between past tense and even sometimes future tense, depending on your storytelling. right? But the other tenses do not get that. They have to stay much more strict. But the hurdle of present tense is being very consistent within those first 2,000 words before people get into your plot, right, or your character. I'll explain those 2,000 word point in another video where I'm doing chapter 1 breakdowns, how to write a chapter 1. Okay, now let's get to the breakdown. Number 1 is an industry standard, as I just said, right? Some people simply will not read a present tense book. Okay, and the breakdowns is stuff I'm saying out loud before I even get to them, because if people want to just download this document and read it, they can, right? But please watch the video, like and subscribe, comment if you have questions. Number 2, this is one that's very important. This is why I write present tense. It gives a sense of movement and momentum in your story, meaning the story is actively happening. In past tense, the story is done. In future tense, it hasn't happened yet. In present tense, it is actively happening, which means people are moving on the screen, on the stage, which means anything can happen as we read. The story can actively change as we read. We don't know someone's going to die unless the narrator says it, right? But if something is happening in present tense, suddenly you could get a plot twist out of nowhere. I personally don't really use plot twists like that, but it's an option, right? Nothing is promised unless the narrator explicitly says someone lives or dies, right? Number 3, action sequences and character movement feel more fluid. This ties back to the previous point. Nothing is set in stone. It's not past. It's not in the past yet, and it's not in the future yet of a prediction, right? It's happening as we speak, so we're at the edge of our seat. It's easier to build tension in present tense. And when I speak about plot styles, I'll speak way more on tension and framing. Keeping the audience engaged is also a lot easier, so that's very helpful because tension tends to do that. If somebody doesn't know how a scene is going to play out, they're more likely to focus because they want to know what happens. Because some people genuinely skip fight scenes and just see who lives and who dies at the end of them and then continue the story because they don't care about fight scenes. But I found like I've spoken to some of those people and they like, well, my fight scenes more because I do it in present tense, so they can't guess what's going to happen because of the way it's framed. Now again, I'll get to framing later on. The wording can be slightly more difficult to write compared to past tense at first because most people tell stories in past tense. So yeah, so we're more familiar with past tense. This is a hurdle you'll have to get over if you're writing present tense. Your brain will sometimes default in the past tense, which is fine for short periods of time or if a sequence naturally feels better in that. But generally, like, you want to stay more in present tense. I'm making an active effort right now at like 1.8 million words deep. Well, probably around 1.7 million when I started writing binary and Oberon, but around 1.7 to stay more consistently in present tense. I had to make the active choice, like, okay, this is the tense I'm going to write in. Because tense isn't that big of a deal if you're just flip-flopping dipping between from present into past. But depending on the type of story you write, it can make or break your story. So I get the luxury of like focusing on it way later down because I've done all the other stuff now. Also I have editor, so thank you Zero for helping me out with that. Consistency is much more important, as I said, and can be easily punished. That's what I've explained this entire time. And examples of the same specific words are run, leaps, climbs, drop, flies, and screams. Right? So all of these words say something is still happening. So for the example, the written example, he runs down the hill. Meaning, when his full stop is there at the end of hill, he's still running down the hill. It is still happening in the background while we're reading the story. Right? So that's present tense. Future tense. This is, okay. Prose writing generally does not do full books in future tense. For specific scenes, it can work. If you have a character who's predicting something, it can work and it can be very great in moderation. But an entire book in future tense is, because of how stories are sequenced and work, it's pretty much impossible to write because the story isn't happening. You're telling somebody the story will happen. So, but there are ways to use future tense and it's not in prose writing, but I still include it just for the sake of being complete, right? So the breakdown is, number 1, it is only used in extremely specific storytelling formats, right? This is what we'll get into later. Number two, this tense is considered a gimmick by most, which is a gimmick is something you lean into when it comes up. Future tense's gimmick is that it tells the audience exactly what's going to happen. Okay? Um, it is part of the experience, but not merely a medium like past or present are. Okay, and the difference is a medium is there for the whole story. The medium for sound is air. The gimmick is a loud explosion, which is a loud vibration of air, right? You don't want the gimmick there all the time, but the medium has to be there all the time for the gimmick to appear sometimes. Okay? Number three, many people interpret this as an ongoing spoiler, which makes the potential audience much smaller. Yes, some people hate spoilers, and future tense is straight up just a spoiler. If I tell you Yoda, right, defeats Palpatine at the end of Star Wars, that's a spoiler. If a story begins by telling you that, and then everything is telling you what's going to happen, but it never actually happens in the story, a lot of people just won't like that. So future tense in prose writing isn't really a thing. It relies heavily on audience investment and in characters and tension. Brings the focus more on character relationships than the story at large. This is what I mentioned earlier, right? Future tense relies on you doing the foundation. Like if you use it in one specific scene within your book, it relies on you laying the foundation for people to care about this event unfolding. If I say Jim is gonna betray Tim, right? It relies on the audience already caring about Jim and Tim's relationship. So we want to see why it happens, and we're hoping it doesn't happen, right? So we're at the edge of our seat waiting for the future tense sequence to play out and understand why it's happening, right? It's commonly used in player-driven interactive games such as Baldur's Gate 3. Yes, this is where future tense is most commonly used. RPG games, player choice games, right? Dating simulators, that kind of stuff is where future tense is most commonly used. Specific examples of specific words / phrases are, and I put / phrases because part of future tense is that you have to put will in front of something, so it will happen, right? So will run, will leap, will climb, will drop, will fly, and will scream, right? It's going to happen. There is no future tense version of scream as an individual word. You have to put a word before it, like will, right, to make it future tense. And then the example is he will run down the hill. It's telling you what he's going to do, right? Future tense, certain point of views pair better with certain tenses, and we'll get into that now. So that was tenses. There are ways to mix and match them, but certain tenses and point of views go together as industry standard, and that's what we'll mainly focus on. So when I get to the outliers, I will mention them, and we will have examples at the bottom of each mix and matched. So, point of view, first person, right? Breakdown. The point of view is where the camera is. Simple. First person point of view means the camera is the character's eyes. It is their ears, it is their mouth. You are the character. The narration is the character, right? If you say a first person camera, it means the camera is in their eyeball, right? Or where the eye would be. So you only see what the person sees. You only know what they know, you only hear what they hear, or smell what they smell. Same goes for everything else, right? It's very much isolating and limiting, which is the point of it, right? So the breakdown I've written is particularly great for mystery and tension, using a lack of information as a storytelling tool. A person cannot know everything going on in the world. So this makes mysteries very easy. The detective doesn't have all the clues, all the information. So we get to see how they use what they have and how what they do not have impacts the story, right? This is also the default point of view for writers and stories that require the audience to care deeply about or understand a character. This is because you are in their head. The narrator is the character. All of the narration is from their brain, right? That's why it's great for mystery, romance, thriller, horror, and similar genres, right? I'll get to the narration part, but the content goal I aim for, and this is something I've never seen people talk about, but like you need to talk about this because I'm sick of these books having terrible content components. percentages. So content, I've broken down into three parts of your book, right? This is between the beginning of chapter 1 and the end and when it writes the end at the final page. Dialogue is everything characters say. Character interaction and subtext is when two characters are talking to each other and they're doing things physically with blocking, or there are things unsaid between them that the audience knows but they don't know, or that they know but the other characters don't know. Secrets, basically. And then exposition / navel gazing. Exposition is narrator info dumping, world dumping, explaining stuff that the audience doesn't know and that nobody is seeing at the moment in the scene. And navel gazing is when a character is in their own head and they're like, my life is so sad, I need help, I have no friends, my partner betrayed me, right? All that stuff, where they're just in their own head for like a whole 5-10 pages, maybe sometimes. I've actually seen like 10 pages of that, right? And generally, first person has a lot of navel gazing and a lack of dialogue. It's normally like, I'd say like 60% navel gazing because a character is just in their own head, because the narration is technically navel gazing because that's them just thinking their own thoughts over and over and over for the whole book. And this is the content goal is something personal for me. This is why I don't like first person, because I want to see the story in motion. I don't want to see a character stop and think about their life and how terrible their life is all the time. So I aim for dialogue 70%, character interaction and subtext 20%, and exposition and navel gazing 10%. And I only put 10% because the narration is technically first person. It's technically the character. I do not like to have characters just in their room, sitting in a chair, thinking about their life to themselves. That's miserable. That feels like I'm pulling out my own teeth when I'm reading that. And I would never try to put my audience through that. Sometimes it is unavoidable. Like I recently wrote chapter 45 of Binary. There was some of that. But it was all character interaction based. But that's nuanced. But generally try to avoid that kind of stuff, right? Characters bemoaning their situation to themselves. I just don't like complainers, I guess. Then the examples, right? This is first person point of view example. So first person past tense is I felt the cold wind against my face, right? So I, the character, is the narrator, and he is telling you what he feels. First person present tense, I feel the cold wind against my face, right? So I will actually underline. I will underline these words because these are the tense words, right? Or phrases in this case. So you'll know clearly what makes them past, present, future, right? So it's I feel the cold wind against my face. I feel the cold wind against my face. Felt the cold wind against my face for past, and then for future it's I will feel the cold wind against my face. So the person is the narrator, so they get to say it in exposition, and will feel because it hasn't happened yet. I'm guessing they're about to open the door or something, right? So now second person. This is the one I need to talk to you all about. So I need to pull you all aside for this and tell you all, unless you have a very specific story format, right, or media format, prose writing generally does not do second person, because second person is one character describing what they're seeing another character do. It is if you and I are standing in a room, I am describing what you are doing, right? It is I see him or I see her pick up the book. I see him or her reach for the remote. You don't see much of this unless the audience buy in, BYIN, meaning the audience care and attachment is very high already to process this. So part one, rarely used in prose writing, as I just explained, but very common in player-driven role-playing games such as Baldur's Gate 3. And I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3 because it's very popular right now, right? But dating simulators also have this kind of stuff where they're like, you see her crying on the bench or something like that, I'm guessing. I've actually never feel one, but like I've seen some ads. 2, the second person future tense is most common. So this is what I meant when I said some tenses and point of views go well together. Second person future tense is the only way I have seen this written. Right? For the content goal, I don't even have enough information because I've only seen this in games. So like the player is half the content, so I can't say how somebody should play their game. So I have to leave this blank. I really don't have enough information because like it's so rare, it's so niche, and it's like it's damn near non-existent in prose writing, right? But future tense is most common, and that's what I'll explain now. Fun fact: this is why I stopped playing Baldur's Gate 3. I couldn't do the narration. So he, right, meaning you are watching the person, right? And then this is the tense, right? So he felt the cold wind against his face. Oh, I would guess it would be, no, to be, I saw him wince after he felt the cold wind against his face. Right. This is actually a much better example, yeah. See, this is how rarely I actually write this. This is how rarely I actually write this, yeah. Crazy. But as you can see, like, you have to change so much because you have to make it clear. Actually, is it? No. It's a bit complicated to write because they have a few specific examples of this. So I saw him wince after he felt the cold wind against his face. Nope, that's actually wrong. Never mind. It's you. You wince. That's the trick. Yeah, it's telling you. Second person is the person telling you. That's why this is so weird. My god. Like, yeah, as you can see, this probably feels weird to read or hear as well. Because it's so rare in prose writing. It's very common in these games though. So you wince, and then it would be as you feel, right? As you feel the cold wind against your face in present tense, and the future would be you wince, you will wince when you feel the cold wind against your face. Yes, as you can see, this is not normal, right? This is why it's reserved for games, because for games they want to know what the character is doing. So sometimes the narrator steps in and they say, you will do this, or you do feel this, right? There are a few stories too where like it's a self-insert, but the reader pretends to be the main character, so the narrator has to tell you how you're supposed to feel, which is weird. But if people like it, and if you like writing it, it's weird to me, but if you like writing it, there is an audience for that, as I said in my first video. If you like it, other people like it. It's just a matter of finding your people, right? And then third person limited, which is the most common, right? The breakdown says, the default point of view for writers and stories that require the audience to care deeply about or understand characters. Great for mystery and tension using a lack of information storytelling tools. Similar to first person in that regard, right? But the difference is happening in the second paragraph here. In this point of view, the narrator and character are much closer, meaning the narrator only knows what the character knows. How closely you stick to this rule depends on your style. There is some room to flex this depending on how you write, but industry standard is generally generally accepted that like the narrator only knows what the character knows. So that's just a safe way to play it. But some writers break rules and it works for them, so you might be the exception. This is why it's a default for most fantasy, sci-fi, adventure writers, because it allows you to tell simultaneous stories using different characters with different information and goals without lying to your audience. Lying to your audience is the important part, right? As the audience doesn't know what the character doesn't know. Surprise twists are much easier to reveal. Warning. There is a big warning in this, right? Because some people do this and it pisses off everybody, including me, especially the audience. Warning. This point of view can greatly increase the word, page, or chapter count of your story. Some of these books are extremely big for no reason, right? Because people don't think about their point of view when they're doing their plot. They will have like I have a scene, chapter 55 of Oberon, where it's a parade, and there are five people who would be main characters in a third person limited book. So if I want their opinions on things, I would have to give each of them a chapter, or I would have to simply exclude them, right? Because every point of view character in a third person limited book is somebody's favorite character. So you generally get this place where the audience is never 100% happy with who you choose to be in, right? If I have Timmy to the left and Jane to the right, some people will want to see the festival from Timmy's point of view, and some people will want to see Jane's point of view, because each character is supposed to read differently. The narrator is affected by the character's voice, which means how the character interprets the world determines how you write each character's point of view. And some people are gonna like Jane, and some people are gonna like Timmy, and some of them will hate Jane, and some will hate Timmy, right? This is the end of like a romance where there are two love interests, and no matter who the writer picks for the main character, some people are gonna be annoyed. So you have to structure your story very carefully, unless you intentionally want to have like one person specifically the main character. But generally, you want the story structure your story very carefully to not have this happen too many times, right? And if you do, make it very intentional and double down, and just have chapters for every character in the scene. But yeah, this is like this is gonna add a lot of page time and a would come to your stories. So just be aware of that when you're writing. But for the most part, aside from that, it's the industry standard. It lets you get closer to the character without having to go full first person like in their brain, right? So it lets you have a third person camera view, which is in a video game, right? The camera is behind your back, floating in the air, like about here. Yes, yeah, about here, looking over your shoulder. That's what this is. First person is through your eyes, your nose, your ears. Third limited is out here. It only knows what you know, so it's right behind you. Okay? But everybody has one of those cameras behind them, so you have to jump from one person's camera to the next if you want to know what's going on inside their heads. You cannot have the narrator say what somebody else is thinking, or if somebody's lying, if the person who we are watching through right now can't read their mind or doesn't know that they're lying. You can have them say like, if we're talking and I think you're lying and it's my chapter, you can have me in my head think, I think they're lying. Or the narrator can say, Keanu thinks they're lying. Right? So the audience knows what I'm thinking. But you cannot say, Jimmy is lying after you speak, if the character name was Jimmy, right? So those are some very like the rough rules for that. But those rules, aside from like, unless you're like looking for like 1% gimmicks, that will generally get you ahead of most people, because most people can't even follow those simple rules. I would know if not the hard one yet, right? The content goal for this one, when I'm practice writing any of these scenes, dialogue 60%, character interaction 30%, navel gazing exhibition 10%, right? Generally, you will find my dialogue percentage is a lot higher than most people. Most people over rely on narration and navel gazing, which is why most people suck. Nobody wants to read about a wiki page, because narration is just a wiki page. That's all it is, especially in fantasy books and sci-fi books. It becomes a Wikipedia page. And the exposition navel gazing in first person, people love to do that because it feels dramatic. When a character is like, "Oh my god, my life is so terrible. I need to fix my life. Why can't I hold down a job?" Right? But the audience, me at least, gets sick of it, because in my web novel profile, you will see here stories for winners, about winners, being winners, right? So people navel gazing and bemoaning their situation, which is normally what this goes into. Because exposition is here as like a courtesy, but really it's like, this is what I had the 10% for. Exposition can be fine, navel gazing, no. Limit that. All your navel gazing should be translated into dialogue. Right? That's an easy way, because dialogue is the most easily processed thing. People can read 100,000 lines of dialogue and still feel excited, but if you give some people 200 lines of navel gazing, they will feel to put down your book and never read anything you write ever again. The human brain is great at processing people speaking, right? And patterns. And dialogue is literally those two things. So it's very easy to write a long book, 880,000 words in my case for Horizon, if 90% of your book is dialogue. Yeah, it keeps people engaged. And also speeds up the pacing of your book. So it helps, it makes it feel faster. It increases your sense of progress, which we spoke about in my second video, right? Promise, progress, payoff. Promise, start the conversation, progress, the conversation, payoff, conversation, and people have new goals. Use dialogue more. And then we have examples of third person limited, right? Past tense, third person limited. I feel the cold wind against my face. You could also put he. So you would probably put he, right? He, yeah. I'm sorry, this is weird to me. And here will be his. I'm changing things as I go, so you can see my process. Yeah, so past tense would be he felt the cold wind against his face, because in this you would have at the beginning of every chapter you would say who is the character for the chapter. So if your character is Jimmy, right, at the top of it would say chapter 4, Jimmy, right? So then we know it's a he, assuming Jimmy is a he. Okay? So he felt is past tense, right? He feels is present tense, this is what I would write, and he will feel is future tense. Okay? So he will feel the cold wind against his face for future tense. Third person omniscient and third person limited share very similar syntax, so which is this, but where they differ is the gimmicks, and I'll make a very long video on the gimmicks of omniscient, because that's how I've found success, by leaning into them, and I'll make sure the videos on the other ones. But now let's get into third person omniscient, which is my baby. So, and yes, I do think if you write an omniscient and you can master omniscient, you're just a superior writer. Yes, I will die on that hill. Third person omniscient breakdown. The rarest point of view aside from second person, because it's kind of impossible unless you're very dedicated to planning your story to tell some of these stories. The rarest point of view aside from second person, especially for writers and stories that require the audience to care about or deeply understand character. This is very important. If you rely on a character-based story, third person omniscient is probably the wrong choice. Horizon is very popular and very successful, and it's third person omniscient, entirely character based. There is no plot, and I did that by design to make it very difficult to write. The book is a list of things that are impossible to write put together. That was my challenge to myself, and I made it work. Which is why I waited to finish that before I really launched this YouTube channel. But I'll make a video on that. So, third person omniscient is God looking down from heaven, right? And if the audience is that far away from a character, it's very difficult to care. The closer they are, such as in the character's head for first person, the easier it is for them to care, because they get more of the character's thoughts, they spend more time with the character, they get attached. Third limited is out here, so they're seeing the character, they get a little bit attached, right? But it's easier because you get a lot more chapters with them. Omniscient is in the sky, and you have to focus on everybody all at once, all the time. So it's difficult to care about one particular character unless you really zoom in the camera on them a lot, because omniscient can flex between limited to an extent, right? Again, the gimmicks, you have to be honest, and then first person to an extent, because you can jump between everybody's thoughts in omniscient, but you can't do that in the other ones. So you can say what everybody in a room is thinking, right? But you have to be honest, so you can't lie about what they're thinking. You can omit it if you just omit what everybody's thinking, but audiences might catch on to that. So you have to be very careful about your plot planned out. You have to plan out your plot in advance before you do this. Now, terrible for mystery and tension unless you take careful care to plan your story. That's what I was just talking about. If you have a plot that requires characters not to know things, third person omniscient can destroy your plot, because the narrator cannot lie. if somebody lies on camera on the page, the narration has to say he lied or she lied or they lied. Okay, you can't say he said, she said, they said if it's a lie. The audience has to know. The character doesn't know, because part of the fun is we know things the character doesn't know, so we get to see the train wreck unfold, right? If done well, it can make for the best stories, as many epics are told through this point of view. That's true. Lord of the Rings is first person pretending to be third person, so it's Bilbo telling an epic that he's actually a part of, right? So he's pretending to be third person, which is why I decided that. The Hobbit also. Well, The Hobbit definitely, yeah. Sorry, The Hobbit, yeah. Lord of the Rings is an epic. It's third person omniscient, right? Dune is omniscient present tense, I believe, so he jumps in everybody's head. A lot of biblical, not biblical, sorry, religious texts are actually written in omniscient, right? The way it's phrased is like God is watching the people, or the God, or the whoever it is, because I'm not just Christian religious texts, but like a couple of different religious texts are phrased like this, right? The dreamer is watching you. So this is the natural like epic, and sometimes they would even put like at least for like certain Greek mythology stories, they would have the point of view be the god himself, so the narrator is omniscient but also gets to speak. So you get to have first, third omniscient, right? Which is like Marvel What If the Watcher is omniscient but also a character and also the narrator. But at the end of the day, it's omniscient because they know everything. When Ultron starts to fight him, that's still limited. But until then, it's omniscient, right? For writers who depend on misinformation or using a lack of information as a storytelling tool, this is not a bad choice, since the narrator knows everything and cannot like, oh, this is a bad choice. Sorry, it's meant to say. Yeah, this is a bad choice. If you really depend on people not knowing the answer to certain problems, and the audience not knowing the answer, right? If the audience has to buy into the mystery, maybe don't do omniscient. Because the omniscient narrator knows the answer and is supposed to like say what's going on, what's going wrong. Like I have a scene where a character says something to my main character in Horizon and straight up lies to him, to his face. And the audience knows if he knew this was a lie, the book would end right here. He would end the book himself immediately right here, right? Everybody else would lose. But he doesn't know that. So the comments are just like annoyed, frustrated, and excited at how it's going to play out, which is the reaction you want to get. That's part of the gimmick. We know stuff the character doesn't know. You have secrets between your narrator and your reader that your character is left out of. So yes, you have to lean into that gimmick. And for some mystery books, that simply will not work, because part of the mystery is having the audience solve the plot before the character does, right? Can you solve the Sherlock Holmes plot? Probably not. Before Sherlock Holmes. That's not written to be solved like that, but like the Agatha Christie stuff, Murder on the Orient Express, Glass Onion, Knives Out, that kind of stuff, can you solve it before the main character solves it? Right? Because the narrator can't lie. This point of view has the highest skill flow, which means it takes the most skill to enter it, because again, your plot has to be planned out very well, right? Especially if you have a mystery intrigue storyline, as I just said. Surprises and twists can happen, they aren't off limits, but they have to be logical and believable. Then they have to be set up beforehand, generally speaking. You have to either foreshadow them or just say they're going to happen. That's how I've done it. And you must avoid situations where the narrator lies to the readers. For example, if a character lies, the narrator must say he lied or give some other indication via subtext. So if someone is very obviously lying, you can get away with not saying he lied. Okay, if the context clues in the scene are he lied, that he's lying, it's fine. If he says I'm drinking water while he's drinking a glass of wine, right, the narrator doesn't generally have to say he lied, because the audience knows, okay, this is the story telling us he's a liar, right? This is us meant to figure out that he's a liar, and that's okay. You can sometimes have to trust your audience in this point of view, because the narrator would spoon feed them every single thing if you don't, right? And that's something writers are a little insecure about, if their audience not figuring out everything in their book. But something I learned from game design, Super Mario 64, I think that's the first 3D one, I think. There's a treasure chest out of bounds, and it's just there because the physics of the game lets you go there. but the developer never expected anyone to actually figure it out. They put something there knowing nobody might figure it out, and they're okay with that. Right? That's the kind of storytelling you have to tell in third person omniscient. At least for me, that's how I found success with it. You have to be okay with some people missing the subtext and being a little confused. Right? That's part of the fun of reading it. In third person omniscient, everybody doesn't have the same experience reading your book. And that's part of focusing down your plot to get your target audience, right? Books for winners, about winners winning. That's what we do. Now, how strictly you follow this depends on your style, but the audience expects the narrator to be trustworthy and may rightfully be upset when it lies to them. For big things, I would generally say always have your narrator be honest. And this is part of what makes Disney's twist villains flop so much. Because Hans, for example, in Frozen, would have been a much better villain if we knew he was a villain from the very start. Because if you knew he was there to kill Elsa and marry Anna and then kill Anna, the audience would know, okay, this guy's a bad guy, and they would feel tense and annoyed and all types of emotions when Anna is falling in love with him. The betrayal would be like slowly sinking in rather than suddenly stabbing us. Because an explosion is just this, but somebody slowly putting a knife through your heart is very painful and it lasts a long time. So one of those things gives the audience a lot more emotion than the other one, right? So in third person omniscient, generally, tension is valued more than a twist. Tension, twist, okay? One is better than the other one. So you have to be confident enough in your plot and your characters to tell the people what is going to happen, and then be like, yeah, I'm going to tell you that the house is going to explode with everybody in it, but you're going to want to see how it happens. You're going to be entertained either way. That's the kind of confidence you need to tell this type of story. So for most people, they like, I've seen some books first person and it's a weak plot, and it's okay if you like character based stuff. You have to also know what writing style you like and what storytelling style you like. So if you just love character stuff and you just love to talk about have two characters falling in love and stuff, first person is the perfect tool. Romance is the biggest genre by far. It's like 10 times bigger than all the other ones put together. Okay? And it works. First person romance, like third person romance, is never going to beat first person romance. That's okay. This video is all about helping you understand what each of these is best at. So finally, the warning: this point of view takes a lot of planning and requires a lot of work to get the audience to care about characters. Again, the camera is very far away, so you have to do a lot of heavy lifting to make the audience care about characters. I've gotten better at my dialogue. I've gotten really good at my dialogue actually. So it's a bit easier for me, but if you're just beginning, like, you have to dedicate some work to it. And I know writing is a million different things put together, but this is one thing that eventually you're gonna have to bite the bullet and just be like, yeah, I'm gonna just have characters talk for like 1,000 pages. Sorry, 1,000 words, right? Like 10 pages of just people talking in different rooms and stuff, just to see how you can get character interactions going. Now, my content goal. Mine is a lot higher than this. Mine is 90% dialogue, right? I'm leaning more into adventure for Oberon, and combat for binary. So right now it's 80 dialogue, 19 character interaction and subtext, and 1% exposition. And I have that 1% there because I try to put as much of that in dialogue and interactions as possible, but sometimes I can't, so I'll just put it in the 1% exposition and navel gazing, right? Narration, depending on the context, I don't really consider that exposition, because I see exposition as when the narrator does something unprompted. So if somebody pulls out a lightsaber and then you start to explain what a lightsaber is, that's exposition. That's a straight up info dump. If somebody's building a lightsaber and two people are talking about how it's built, that's dialogue. That's character interaction. That's good. Okay, that's the main difference. And example, past, third person omniscient, past tense, right? He, right? So this is the person, felt, right? He felt cold wind against his face, right? He, again, not I or not you, feels, that's past, that's present tense, sorry, this is what I write, cold wind against his face. So same thing, right? But just it feels this time. And then he, again, not I or you, will feel, because present tense, cold wind against his face. Right? This is how I write. This is my bread and butter, third person omniscient. Yes, I do think it's the most difficult one to write. I will die on that hill. If you disagree, prove me wrong. But yeah, this entire document will be available in the link below. Our next video will be syntax, grammar, rules. I'll be going over some guidelines for how to write in different languages using machine translation, because I've been looking into that as well, because some people have taken my story and put it on like Russian sites and stuff without my permission, but they leave my links in, so I don't really care. Yeah, so I'll be going over grammar, syntax, how to use them, how to do them for storytelling, and prose. I'll be going over very simple prose and writing style guide, how to better find your writing style, because honestly, that's the one thing I can't teach you. I can't tell you how to write, like what style to have. That's something that's naturally occurring to you. So in our next video, we'll be going over that. But for now, take a look at this, rewind, pause, take notes, right? Screenshot whatever you need. And if you want to ask questions, you could comment below. All my links are in the description. Like, comment, subscribe. And if you need anything else, you could always message me. You could comment or message me in Discord. And if you want some proof of what I write, just check out my profile. You can see how terrible I was for elementals and how much better I've gotten for binary. 4 years, 2 million words. We're getting there. Alright, have a good one and get to writing. And hopefully I'll see you on my Trackerbear if you join it. See ya.